Let's talk about how to not die from brain disease. The information that I'm going to share in today's video is from a book called How Not to Die. It's by Dr. Michael Greger. He is a medical doctor and he wrote this book called How Not to Die. And basically every single chapter goes through different types of diseases. So he has like how not to die from lung disease, how not to die from heart disease. And one of the chapters is how not to die from brain disease. And honestly, I love the book. Actually, have it here. Let me show you. It's backwards, so don't mind me, but this is what essentially the book looks like. It says how not to die in here. It's a thick one. It's a big boy here. But such a great book. So if you're looking for just like an overall book with great research, great information on just overall health and wellness and how not to die from different diseases, would 10 out of 10 recommend this. And so we're going to go over specifically that chapter of how not to die from brain disease. And I'm going to share some of the research he has in this book. I do have my handy dandy laptop here. So if you see me looking down, these are the notes that I made from that book. So I am going to be going through it with you so that you can be informed on how to really protect your brain long term. And specifically what we're going to do is we're going to go through the two major brain diseases that lead to death and what are some of the top research studies and what they say in terms of what you can do starting today to protect your brain, because I truly feel like the brain is the most undernourished organ, and that's because you can't see it. It's the hardest one to see, but you feel it every single day. You feel it in terms of your ability to focus and concentrate your energy, how positive your thoughts are, how good you feel about yourself and your life on a daily basis. And that's why taking care of your brain is essential. This is why I focus on this work. And if you're new to this channel, my name is Dr. Bisley Natalie. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapy certified naturopathic doctor, and I teach people how to rewire their brain naturally. And I truly believe that if you want a powerful life, it has to start by you learning how to rewire your brain, by you supporting your brain health. Because when your brain is powerful, you are powerful and you become unstoppable and capable of anything that you set your mind to. And with that being said, the two biggest brain disease killers that we're going to talk about in this video is stroke. Stroke is a huge one. So the way that I want you to think about stroke is that stroke is essentially like a heart attack, but for your brain. So when you think about a heart attack, what happens? There's plaque built up in the artery, and then the heart can no longer pump blood because there's that blockage happening. And because of that blockage, it makes a heart stop, and that's a heart attack. Same thing can actually happen in your brain because you have arteries everywhere. So you can actually have plaque that builds up in your brain. And then because there's plaque built up, you have this blood flow that's no longer able to go to certain areas of your brain, completely stopping that blood flow. And depending on how big that artery blockage is, it can lead to death. Or sometimes what can actually happen is that you have that stroke, but it's only for a little moment and then the blood continues to go through. But that can also be damaging because that can actually kill off certain parts of your brain and brain cells and lead to lifelong damage. So either or, not a good situation, and we really want to do things in the present moment to avoid stroke long term. The second most common brain disease is Alzheimer's disease, which honestly can be more dangerous and really affect quality of life that much more than stroke, because Alzheimer's disease is a very slow decline over years and years and years, and that can have a significant impact on your loved ones and also on yourself. And Alzheimer's disease, the hallmark of it is these buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain, and because these plaques build up, it starts to affect memory, and then over time it eventually leads to death. And something to take note is that stroke tends to be more common than Alzheimer's disease in terms of the number of deaths a year it causes. Let's start off with tips as to what you can do on a day-to-day basis to really decrease your chances of having a stroke later on in life. So in his book, he specifically starts off by talking about fiber, and he talks about how high fiber intake can actually help to ward off stroke. What's really unfortunate is that in his book, he notes that approximately 97% of Americans eat fiber deficient diets. So I'm based in Canada, specifically Ontario, specifically Toronto, but we could honestly assume that those facts are very similar to Canadians as well, because our diets are pretty westernized. And what he did say in this book is that the research shows that even increasing just 7 grams of fiber in diet can actually decrease your risk of stroke in the future, which is pretty positive if you think about it, right? Because if you're already not eating a lot of fiber, it can be very difficult to think about adding more fiber in your diet. But even if you just make these small changes, it has a very positive effect and impact on your brain health long term. So what does 7 grams of fiber look like? That looks like eating a bowl of oatmeal with berries, or it looks like having a serving of beans daily. And that on its own can decrease your risk of stroke significantly. So how does a high fiber diet specifically protect the brain? Couple of different ways that can happen. So one, eating higher fiber actually helps to control your cholesterol. And as we mentioned before, right, what's usually good for your heart is also good for your brain, because a stroke is essentially a heart attack, but it's in the brain. And so what can also happen too is eating a high fiber diet can also help to regulate your blood sugar levels, because we also know that if we have dysregulated blood sugar patterns, that puts us at a higher risk of diseases like stroke and even Alzheimer's disease. In his book, he mentions that if you want to be really proactive, and if you're just like really gung-ho and want to be A+ on this whole fiber thing, he recommends having 25 grams of soluble fiber every single day. So what soluble fiber is that this is fiber that dissolves in water. So you want to think things like beans, oats, nuts, and berries. And then he says you also want to try to get in 47 grams of insoluble fiber. So this is fiber that doesn't dissolve in water. So think things like whole grains, brown rice, and whole wheat. And fiber isn't even just good for brain health. It's great for everything in your body, from your digestion to your heart health to all your organ health. So you really want to make sure that you are getting enough fiber in every single day. Another nutrient that he mentions that I was honestly even surprised by is potassium. And he talks about how having diets high in potassium can also support and decrease risk of stroke. And what is the best source of potassium? Plants. And a lot of us are not eating enough plants in our diet. You will be shocked at how many conversations I have about in my practice with my patients about eating vegetables. Okay, because nobody is eating enough vegetables. I always tell my patients, half your plate better be vegetables at every single meal if you want to prevent disease long term, and especially if you want to support a strong and healthy brain. Your body can only function so long at the rate that you're going right now without having enough vegetables, and I promise you, you will feel the effects and impacts of it and develop chronic disease long term if you're not eating enough vegetables. And fun fact for you, bananas are not high in potassium. So I knew that before, but in this book, he specifically put bananas on that scale of foods that are high in potassium, which I didn't know about. And he said that bananas come at place 1,611 right after Reese's Pieces. So that really gives you the idea of how little potassium bananas actually have. And so what are the best foods that are actually high in potassium? So leafy greens, beans, sweet potatoes. And that's not too hard to get in if you think about it. The next food that he talks about, which is really great to reduce stroke risk, are citrus fruits. So citrus fruits specifically have a phytonutrient in them called hesperidin, and it actually appears to increase blood flow in the body. So they've done some really cool research studies on this. He was talking about this one study where they gave women who had low blood flow in their like extremities, so their fingers and their toes, and they gave them citrus fruits, and they actually were able to measure the difference and notice that after having citrus fruits, they had increased blood flow to their fingers and their toes, which is really, really cool. So citrus fruits are great because essentially when you think about with stroke, right, what ends up happening, plaque in the artery, it decreases blood flow. So increasing things in your body that improve blood flow can be really beneficial to protect brain health long term. Sleep is another big factor that he talks about in this section, and specifically the effect of lack of sleep. There was a study done on 150,000 Americans, and what it found is that those who slept 6 hours or less or 9 hours or more were at the highest risk of getting stroke. Interesting, right? So more sleep isn't always better. You want to really get into that sweet spot of 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And studies done in other countries like Europe and China confirm those same results as well. The last food that he talked about in this section were foods that are high in antioxidants. So why antioxidants are really important is because it protects your body from something called free radicals. So free radicals, in the simplest terms to describe them, is that they're unstable molecules that damage your cells by stealing electrons from them. So they steal important materials from other molecules so that they can become really, really strong, which then leaves other molecules and cells in your body really depleted. There's been tons of theories to claim that this free radical damage is what leads to aging. It can also damage your body's primary energy source, which is the mitochondria. It's also been stated that oxidative stress is why we get wrinkles, why we lose some of our memory, why our organ systems break down while we age. And so the key to slowing down this free radical process is to eat foods that are high in a lot of antioxidants. So how do you tell if a food is high in antioxidant? You basically want to cut it open and you want to leave it in the air. If you notice that food's starting to brown, it's oxidizing, so it's not high in antioxidants. So for example, you leave an apple or banana, not saying these foods are bad, but you leave an apple or banana out, they start to brown. However, if you cut a mango open and if you leave it open to the air, it doesn't brown. And why is that? Because of vitamin C. Mangoes tend to have lots of high vitamin C, and vitamin C tends to be one of our most powerful antioxidants in our body. There's been research done to show with people in cancer, right? So oftentimes people are struggling with cancer, if they're trying to support themselves naturally, along with all the other treatments they're getting, they'll often get pumped with high doses of vitamin C because of how high of an antioxidant it is. Some of the best foods that are high in antioxidants are berries and greens. And fun fact for you, plant foods contain 64 times more antioxidants than animal foods. And herbs and spices also contain a lot of antioxidants. So, spice away when it comes to your food. Use spices to really add flavor to your foods because spices are extremely high in antioxidants. So how do antioxidants reduce our risk of stroke? They can prevent circulation of those oxidized fats in the bloodstream that end up damaging the sensitive walls of the blood vessels in the brain, right? So antioxidants protect us from those free radicals. And this isn't even just going to have a positive effect on your brain health, but also a positive effect and impact on aging as well. So those are the tips that he shared for preventing stroke. Now let's get into Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease truly can be one of the most saddest diagnoses to get because once those brain cells are dead, it's like virtually impossible to revive them. And so this is why prevention becomes so important, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. And what I really want you to understand is that you don't wake up and just randomly get Alzheimer's disease. It is the result of the buildup of these plaques over years. These plaques that start in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and then you get that diagnosis in your 70s. So really, the earlier you start when it comes to your brain health, the better the outcome you're gonna have long term. And as I mentioned before, what is good for our hearts is also good for our brains because it essentially prevents that buildup of plaques. Studies have shown that Alzheimer's patients have more plaque buildup and narrowing of the arteries. And Alzheimer's disease, fun fact for you, has also been labeled type 3 diabetes. So this also just goes to show you the importance of regulating your blood sugar levels as well to prevent that progression of Alzheimer's disease. And what can happen is that excess glucose can actually result in the buildup of plaques in the arteries. Studies have also found that treating vascular factors like high cholesterol, blood pressure, can actually slow the progression of the disease, but not stop it. Okay. And again, this is why prevention is so key because again, once Alzheimer's has started and progressed, it's like virtually impossible to bring your brain back to before that damage of Alzheimer's disease. What's really interesting too that he noted in this chapter specifically is that the risk of Alzheimer's disease goes up depending on where you live. So they actually have done a comparative study to show that, for example, men living in Japan actually had a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease versus when those same men actually moved to America, their risk of Alzheimer's disease increases 2, 3, 4 times compared to when they were actually living back in Japan. And I know that this was done specifically in America, but let's just throw Canada right in there too, because again, we eat such a westernized diet. And so this really just goes to show you that link with diet and brain health and disease risk, especially if those same people living in different countries had a lower risk and they moved here and their risk increased. There's also been a gene that's been correlated to increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And what scientists are claiming is that with this gene, what ends up happening is that it results in an abnormal accumulation of cholesterol in the the brain cells. So again, just goes to show you and really highlights that importance of reducing cholesterol, reducing plaque, and applying some of those, heart strategies to brain health as well. In this chapter, one of the best things he recommends are plant-based foods because they have high antioxidants, so things like berries and greens, and especially a food that he calls polyphenolic foods because they protect nerve cells. I talk to my patients about polyphenolic foods all the time, so you want to think about those like rich red color of like berries and cherries, those plums, those dark colors are really high in those polyphenolic foods, and they are so protective for like virtually every disease out there. Also talked about saffron. So much research coming out on the herb saffron, and honestly, I'm gonna make a whole separate video about this because it is that magical herb when it comes to brain health. Tons of research to show the positive and beneficial effect of saffron when it comes to depression and anxiety. And in this chapter, he also talked about that saffron was compared to the leading Alzheimer's drug, and it was shown to be just as effective and improved cognitive functioning to that same level as that leading Alzheimer's drug, which is wild. Ends this chapter off specifically talking about something called end glycation products. So AGEs is what we call them for short. And what end glycation products are is essentially glucose going and attaching to other molecules and creating a dangerous molecule. And so this is why also regulating blood sugar levels becomes very important because AGEs have been shown to increase amyloid plaques in the brain. What are some of those factors that increase these end glycation products in the body? Cigarette smoking increases them. Dry heat cooking methods also increase AGEs. And so the way that you cook your food actually matters. So the foods that tend to be the highest in AGEs are meat, cheese, and highly processed foods. The foods that are the lowest are grains, beans, breads, vegetables, and fruits. Also recommends that cooking meat using moist heat cooking methods like steaming and stewing was the most recommended. And I can even say that I probably need to change up a couple of my cooking methods after reading that. And the higher the heat that we cook meat on, the more end glycation products that it creates and the more toxic it actually ends up being for our body. This is why there's actually so much research to show that, for example, barbecuing, right? We barbecue at pretty high heats. That food can actually be very toxic for our brain. Doesn't matter if you're using organic meat, grass-fed, whatever it was cuddled with, that animal, doesn't matter, okay? It tends to be much more toxic for us and even cancerous, depending on especially if you're eating those really like burnt bits, which I used to love. And then I learned this and I was like, oh, can't even have this anymore. And that's the thing sometimes I feel like with this whole healthy eating thing, it just feels like you can't have anything anymore. But again, it's how you look at it, how you focus on it. And I think at the end of the day, 80-20 rule, right? 80%, you want to make sure you're supporting your brain health, doing all the right things. 20%, enjoy yourself and live your life the best that you want to. As a reminder, two of the biggest diseases you want to know about, stroke and Alzheimer's disease. And honestly, all of these steps are a really, really great way to get started. To really sum it up, what is that theme here? Eat more plant-based foods, lots of berries, lots of greens, and making sure you're getting that variety, getting in some of those citrus fruits, and making sure your sleep is on point. And so if you can just start off by just eating a bigger plant-based diet, that on its own is going to protect you so much. And if you're looking for a more personalized one-on-one support to really set your brain health up for success long-term, book a free 15-minute clarity call with me and we can chat about what your plan looks like.